You know, sometimes an object can tell a story that's way more powerful than any book. A story about faith, about courage, and about a huge transformation. Today, we're diving into the story of a church that was so completely changed by the world around it, its most sacred symbol actually ended up with an arrest warrant. Yeah, you heard that right. This is the story of how a quiet mission became a powerful voice, and it all revolves around a single subversive cross. Okay, so let's set the scene. Picture this, it's 1989. We're in San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador. The entire nation is being ripped apart by a really brutal civil war. And right in the middle of all this chaos, a small church finds itself directly in the crosshairs. So, in November of that year, soldiers raid the Resurrection Lutheran Church. They're looking for the bishop, but he's not there. And in their frustration, they arrest several church workers. And then they do something you just wouldn't believe. They arrest the cross from the altar. Why? Why would they do that? Because for them, that simple wooden cross had become a symbol of rebellion. Now, this didn't just happen out of the blue. The 1980s in El Salvador were a time of just unimaginable violence. The whole decade kicked off with the assassination of Archbishop Oscar Romero, who was a hero to the poor. And the violence just spiraled from there. Any religious leaders who dared to speak up for the oppressed became targets. People like Medardo Gomez, a Lutheran pastor who was arrested and tortured, and later became the bishop. Then, just days before his own church was raided, a death squad murdered 6 Jesuit priests. I mean, the message was terrifyingly clear. Nobody was safe. So this brings us to the big question here, right? How did a small Lutheran church with its roots way up in the American Midwest become such a threat to a military regime that they started hunting its leaders and arresting its symbols? Well, to answer that, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning. So yeah, how does a mission from Minnesota end up on a death list? Let's rewind the clock, say about 50 years. The story of this church doesn't start with a fight. It starts with a quiet, really determined faith. It begins with pioneers on a mission. Meet people like Myrtle Norden. You can see her right there in the photo on the left. Back in the 30s and 40s, she and other missionaries traveled from places like Minnesota all the way down to Colombia and Mexico. They weren't carrying political manifestos. No, their tools were Bibles, school supplies, and cool vehicles like this mobile mission station you see on the right. Their goal was pretty simple: share their faith and help out in communities they felt had been overlooked. And what's really fascinating here is the kind of deep, personal faith that was driving them. This was not about politics at all. It was about spiritual grit, pushing through incredible hardship. When Myrtle Norden got so sick with malaria it almost killed her, her focus stayed entirely on her faith. And that was the spirit that founded this church, deeply personal and intentionally separate from all the worldly conflicts going on around them. So the original mission was crystal clear. It was all about evangelism, building things communities needed, like schools and clinics, and offering spiritual guidance. And crucially, you see it on that last point, the mission was designed to be strictly apolitical. Their work was meant for the soul, completely separate from the state. But the continent they'd come to serve was about to change dramatically. So let's talk about that turning point. Because the 1960s and 70s, well, they saw Latin America just erupt in political and social chaos. The ground was shifting under everyone's feet, and the church was standing right on top of it. And this wasn't happening in just one country. All across the region, military dictatorships, civil wars, and brutal repression, well, they became the norm. In places like El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, it was ordinary people who were caught in the crossfire. Poverty, injustice, and violence were just part of daily life. And this created a huge crisis for the church. I mean, how could they keep preaching a gospel of hope while ignoring all the suffering right there in front of them? How do you build schools when government soldiers are killing the students? Staying apolitical started to look a lot like being complicit. The mission had to evolve, or it was going to become totally irrelevant. And evolve it did. By the 1980s, especially in El Salvador, the church took on a new and very dangerous calling. They made a choice to stand with the victims, to become a voice for the voiceless. And wow, this slide just lays it all out so perfectly. Look at the left. That's the original mission from the 1930s, a gospel of the soul, all about evangelism and staying out of politics. But then look at the right. That's the new reality of the 1980s, a gospel in action. The focus blew up from just personal salvation to defending human rights. Building clinics wasn't enough, now they had to provide sanctuary for refugees. And that whole apolitical stance, it was replaced by a prophetic witness against injustice, speaking truth right to the face of power, no matter what it cost. But listen, this wasn't just some top-down decision made by church leaders in an office somewhere. This change grew from the very communities the church had been serving for decades. It was the people in congregations, like this one in Mexico, who were living through the injustice every single day. The church was, in a very real way, simply following its flock. And the stakes? They could not have been higher. 75,000. Just let that number sink in. That's the estimated number of civilians killed during the 12-year civil war in El Salvador. That's the world the church was now operating in. And that's why staying silent just wasn't an option anymore. This new mission took incredible courage, and it was personified by leaders like Bishop Medardo Gomez. He became one of the sharpest critics of the government's human rights abuses, and for that, his name was literally published on a death list. After the Jesuit priests were murdered, he had to flee to the U.S. just to stay alive. But, incredibly, he came back just a few months later, surrounded by an international group of supporters who acted as a living human shield to protect him. Which brings us right back to where we started. Back to that cross, the one arrested by soldiers. So what really made it so dangerous? And what's its legacy today? Okay, so here's why it was so subversive. See, this wasn't just any old cross. During a worship service, the congregation had physically written the sins of their society onto the cross. They named the evils they were facing every day: persecution, hunger, discrimination, violence. The cross was literally carrying the written testimony of the people's suffering. And what happened next is it's almost unbelievable. After the soldiers arrested the cross, they imprisoned it. But thanks to some diplomatic pressure, an order came down for its release. And in a moment of just profound, unbelievable irony, the soldiers unknowingly transported this cross, which was covered in a list of their own government's sins, from a military prison directly into the presidential house itself. They basically delivered a symbol of their own condemnation right to their front door. Eventually, the cross was returned to the Resurrection Lutheran Church, and it's still there today. It's not just a symbol of faith anymore. It's a testament to what that faith became in a time of crisis. A faith that refused to be silent, that refused to look away from suffering, and that dared to speak truth to power. The story of this small church and its subversive cross leaves us with a really powerful question, one that echoes way beyond the borders of El Salvador. When a community of faith comes face to face with profound injustice, what is its ultimate responsibility? Is it to tend to the soul or to fight for the oppressed? Or maybe, are they in the end the exact same thing?